Hello, everybody, and welcome to your live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at Rouxbe, and I'm also one of your instructors in the courses. Today, I'm holding my office hours, and I'm so pleased that you can join me. This is your chance to ask questions about cooking methods and ingredients and questions of this nature. That would help you out in your courses as well as your own kitchen, of course, as you continue cooking in different ways. As we get started today, I want to mention a couple of quick housekeeping items that I always touch upon. And the first one is that, if you'd like to participate more directly in today's program by asking a question, feel free to do so by entering that in the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see a white box that says Add Question Here. And that'll make its way into the queue or the list of questions that you see on the right-hand side of the page. And the second thing I want to touch upon is a related point, and that is, as you look at the questions that are already populated, you'll see a heart-shaped icon, in each of those question boxes. If you really like that question and want it to be answered a little bit sooner than later, go ahead and click on the heart-shaped icon, and it'll bump it up in priority. Okay, so I get to it a little bit quicker. Okay, otherwise, let's go ahead and start in on today's program. What I want to do today is start out by talking a little bit about a very common question that I get, and this concerns ingredient substitutions. Okay, so let me talk a bit about on this topic, and then we'll jump into the questions that all of you have posed. All right, regarding recipe substitutions, or I should say ingredient substitutions in your recipes, let me give you two answers. The first one is if it's for an assignment, a Rouxbe assignment that you will submit for a grade, please be aware that substitutions are certainly permitted. However, the learning outcome of that assignment associated with that lesson must still be met. Okay, so if you're unsure about how the learning outcome might change based upon a substitution you have in mind, please reach out to us ahead of time. And, we can brainstorm and troubleshoot and come up with a solution that works for everybody. Okay. And probably the best way to do that is to reach out to support@rouxbe.com. All right. The second scenario is one that we would encounter in just general cooking. Okay. And if you're thinking about changing a recipe, I say go for it. That's the first thing I always tell a student. Give it a try. And some of you have already heard me utter these words or type these words in response to such a question. Okay. I will also, within this context, add that, our focus here at Rouxbe is on you learning cooking methods and the techniques that are associated with cooking. Okay, and recipes are provided, of course, in our courses as a means to practice these methods and techniques. All right, and so in other words, the recipes in a way are secondary. But of course, that's where the rubber hits the road, and that's where we get to see the results of our understanding, right, our comprehension of the content, as well as our skill development as we move through the course with respect to the cooking methods and techniques that we talk about. Okay, so understand that any change that you make to a recipe will most likely result in something a little bit different than the original recipe or different from what you might have experienced in the past. Okay, and that's reasonable, isn't it? We change an ingredient, so the outcome will be different. That makes sense. Okay. So a part of this, of course, is your educational experience and your accumulation of knowledge, right? It's that cooking wisdom that you're building up as you make changes and also make these recipes yours to fit your specific situation, right? Your texture and taste and flavor preferences, or the preferences of the audience for whom you're cooking. Okay, understand that also as you make changes to equipment, or if there are changes in ambient temperature or humidity or altitude, then there may be some changes in the results of the preparation that you're making. Okay, and here is where I want to really encourage you to exercise your curiosity and just give it a try. Okay, you've got a foundation of some sort, okay, of knowledge as well as skill, regardless of where you are in your course, and sort of stay, reasonably close to where your comfort is at this point, but pushing forward and outward little by little. Okay, and through this experience, you're going to become much more confident in the kitchen. Okay, but keep in mind, right, that a change in the recipe will reasonably result in something different that's produced. And number two, go for it. Exercise your curiosity, have fun, and keep on learning. Okay, so that's my topic that I want to touch upon. Let's go ahead and jump into this, the list of today's questions. All right, so the first one is from Victoria. And the question is, I am cooking for one, and most of the recipes make far too much food. Do you have tips to easily cut the recipes in half? Do we adjust the cooking times, etc.? Plus, best ways to save the half-cut veggies, i.e. bell peppers, onions, etc. Okay, yes. So, to begin with, I think, cutting a recipe in half is an easy and often a reasonable place to start, where we can cut down 4 or maybe 6 portions to 2 or 3, and that's often more manageable. And it might even allow us to put some leftovers into the freezer. And, when it comes to cooking times, this is where you'll need to do some experimentation, okay? Sometimes the cooking time can remain the same, and other times it's probably reduced, although probably not cut in half if we're talking about cooking something, okay? But you will need to take, I suggest, I should say, you take notes, but regardless, you'll need to pay attention to the changes that you make in this context of experimentation. As an outsider peeking into your scenario, I don't always have the exact answer. I'm not able to have the exact answer. Even when I'm cooking in my own kitchen, I don't have the exact answer. It's always a matter of experimentation if I'm doing something new. Okay, and so it's with that attitude that I would like you to approach the cooking as well in terms of these changes that we make. Now, when we look at other ingredients in a recipe, when we consider pungent, highly flavor concentrated ingredients, for example, spices that are pretty strong, whether it's cardamom or black pepper or something else, that you perceive as being robust, or it could be garlic or ginger in the fresh aromatic category. Those sorts of things you need to often adjust independently of the other main ingredients. Oftentimes that balance really is sort of knocked a kilter, so to speak, and it requires, again, some experimentation on your part in order to find a balance that you enjoy. Okay, so while we might cut the recipe in half, at least on paper, keep in mind that you'll need to remain engaged with the cooking process, adjust timing, as well as focus especially on the more pungent ingredients to tailor the outcome to your palate preference. All right, thank you. All right, and the next question. How can I start my own food catering business from home? Do I have to have a license or permission? Where can I get easy to follow recipes for vegan dumplings? Okay. I think that second question was added just to see if I was paying attention. Okay, so the first one here regarding starting a business. I am a big fan of, first of all, visiting a website called Score, SCORE.org, score.org. And SCORE is an organization that's part of the Small Business Administration here in the United States. And there are regional offices that are staffed by people that are experienced in many different areas of business. And you'll no doubt find somebody either directly or online that can help you in the realm of food or a food business of some sort. And you'll also see right now that Patrick just posted the link to Score, as well as a link to a live event from some time ago where I talk about these basics of starting a business. Okay, and part of that discussion is to create a business plan. A business plan can be lengthy, and I always encourage my students to go through the full process, spending the hours and the weeks necessary to really address all of the facets of a new business startup that will be prompted by the development of a business plan. Okay, and the folks at Score and the website itself will have some resources to get you started. All right. And, in terms of licensing and permission, these sorts of things are going to bump up against laws, right, or regulations that pertain to your city, as well as your county and state. So there's an and or in between each of those. So your city, county, and state with respect to food safety and sanitation, with respect to starting a business more generally, okay, and registering a name and the type of entity that you are forming and other factors. So, again, reach out to the folks at Score and they can help point you in one direction or another. Another thing you can do is to reach out to your county health department. At least around here, it's administered by the county government to get started in the food safety and sanitation realm of your endeavor. Okay. And regarding vegan dumplings, offhand, I don't have any recipes, but if you do a search online for vegan dumplings, I know you'll come across many, many options, and then you can see if any of the recipes suit, your desired outcome. All right, thank you. All right. Oh, look at this. We've got a message from Wendy here. It says, I happen to be a Score mentor volunteer, also learning to cook. Awesome, Wendy. Welcome. I mentioned Score many times during my office hours here, and I'm so pleased that you've joined us today. All right. Next up from Kathleen. Greetings from England. Greetings, Kathleen from England. I'm on the lookout for ideas for topping for vegan nachos. I already have a cashew-based queso that I love, as well as a fabulous walnut chorizo. I would love to hear any other suggestions. Wow, okay. So a couple of things come to mind. One would be, for me, sauteed vegetables. And it could be a vegetable medley of some sort. It could be fresh vegetables, or it could be even frozen vegetables for some convenience, whether it's peas or corn or carrots and onions and garlic, sauteed for a warm topping. I always like to add fresh herbs to most anything that I'm producing. And, nachos for me evoke the cuisine of Mexico. So I think about cilantro, but there's also, thyme and basil and really anything that you might enjoy on the food that you produce. I also think about just other salsas from Mexico, whether they're fresh salsas or cooked salsa, based upon dried chilies. And, you might do a search for some specific recipes in these different categories and see if something suits your desired outcome. Thank you. All right, next up from Charlotte. When I finish the course, will I still have access to all my tasks and other information I have received, recipes, information, etc.? Charlotte, you will have access to most everything. One area that you will not have access to will be your assessments. Okay, and then the other thing that goes away is the Q&A access at the task level. All right, now, having said that, you can always reach out to us at support@rouxbe.com, and our team here would be happy to assist you. All right, thank you. And Teresa asked, is there a food substitution list? No, we do not provide a food substitution list. My response to that, I guess, as I've got you here, is certainly in one respect there may be some reasonably easy substitutions to recommend for certain ingredients, but for other ingredients, it depends on the context. It depends on the role or the function of that ingredient in the preparation. So sometimes there's one ingredient as a substitute, and sometimes it takes 3 or 4 or 5 ingredients to fulfill all the functions of the single ingredient that you're taking out. And so it's not always that easy depending on what it is that you're preparing. All right, thank you. All right, and next up from Adam, it mentions in the course that nonstick pans shouldn't be used at high heat. Why is that? And does the same go for other specialty pans such as the rock pans or pans made to be nonstick by their texture instead of a coating? The general guideline for avoiding the use of nonstick pans at high heat is because of the commonly applied coating will be damaged at high heat. And so there's shortening of the shelf life of the pan, as well as possible off-gassing, right, from the coating itself. Now, in terms of other specialty pans, such as the rock pan, I'm unfamiliar with the rock pan. Now, you mentioned pans that are made to be nonstick by their texture instead of a coating. So these sound like some newer technologies, in which case I recommend that you reach out to the manufacturer to learn what their recommendations would be for handling such a pan on high heat. Thank you. And next up, can a toaster oven be used as effectively as a conventional oven? I.e. cooking temperature, time, and or outcome? By golly, my quick answer is yes, it can. There are toaster ovens in different sizes, of course, but some of them are rather sophisticated, and they mimic all of the functions that you might find in a larger, conventionally sized oven. And so, my quick answer is yes, there are toaster ovens out there that can get the job done for you. Thank you. All right, next up is from Austrian. Hey, how you doing? Welcome back today. Yes, indeed, everything is going very well at my end, and I wish the best for you today as well. Let's see, I want to know, if you can list in order of least important to most important about a plate, not just in class, but in at the professional level. So when you talk about plates, I'm guessing it's plate presentation, okay, and the plating of food. And so let me share a few thoughts. And these are not necessarily in a least to most important order, but rather these are just desirable points to consider very often. But having said that, the way that we might plate food, of course, will differ depending on the setting and even the style of food, as well as our audience, and even the price point, the menu price point, right, of the food that we're offering. And, you know, reasonably, you know, I could say that the higher the menu price, right, the more sort of fancy the presentation maybe ought to be, and oftentimes is expected to be from the diner's perspective. And you know, conversely, if we're in a more casual setting, it's okay to relax some of the plating details. Okay. And so, yeah, there's certainly, I think, a much longer conversation we could have around this. But let me just start with a few things, okay? And one is when we're plating, there's an idea or a concept called negative space. And negative space is very simply open space on the plate. And so what this means is that we're putting a little bit less food on the plate, and we're leaving some of the plate exposed. And in other words, we're not overcrowding the plate. That's another way to look at it. And so this idea of preserving some negative space helps maintain balance, visual balance, and a more relaxed look on the plate. And relaxed meaning the way that the diner feels, right, as she or he looks at the plate, especially that first impression as the plate is placed in front of the diner. Okay, so negative space is going to be very important. I'm coming primarily from a North American perspective here. Some of the cultural guidelines around plating differ and can differ quite a bit in other regions of the world. Okay, another aspect to think about is the creation of height, right, or that third dimension of the presentation. We get two dimensions very quickly and easily on the plate, but it can be made much more interesting and visually stimulating if we can draw that food up toward the sky and create some height. And, you know, some things are more easily done or you know, crafted into that third dimension than others, right? If you've got a salad, for example, that's made of a chiffonade of greens, and then it's relatively easy to coax that up into a nice sort of a conical shape, to really bring, you know, 4, 5, 6 inches of height very easily to the plate. You know, sometimes we will use pureed, like a stiff puree of, for example, sweet potato or some other root vegetable that will hold its shape, and then we're able to lean other components against that base, thereby creating some height on the plate. All right, so those are just a couple of scenarios, a couple of ideas here. Color contrast is also something to consider. Now, color contrast, you know, if you think about many plates, there's a lot of brown from caramelization, for example. Green is also a very common color as we reach toward a lot of ingredients, you know, in the natural world. But if we can then introduce a contrasting color, it could be the red of beets, or the orange of certain sweet potatoes, or it could be a purple yam. these sorts of things can bring unexpected little, as we say, a pop of color to the plate, and can be very interesting to the eye, very visually stimulating. This is where garnishes come into play, and very often a garnish is something that's red or something that's green to stand out against something different, often brown or shades of brown that are already on the plate. Okay, so color contrast, shape contrast. So we, circles, triangles, squares, skinny, long things. If you can bring in some different elements in the area of shape, you can introduce some visual interest or stimulation to the plate. All right. Oftentimes when we're plating a main ingredient that is, for example, sliced, we try to place an odd number of those items on the plate because odd numbers tend to be more stimulating to the brain and therefore more visually interesting. And so rather than putting out 4 items of something, try 3 or 5, depending on the size of the item and how much negative space you want to preserve. Okay. Also texture contrast. And texture contrast, would be crunchy things and hard things and soft things, in this manner. And certainly those are an aspect of the plating that we experience on the palate, but we can also often tell by just looking at the plate, right? That first impression as to what's going on the plate. And then we start to anticipate what that's going to feel like once we start to eat the food. And that connection is important. And so, consider the different textures as you design a plate and then build it. And, this is where experience comes into play. And this is also where practice, doing a trial run on the plating idea that you have in mind is very helpful, because you then have time to make adjustments to the overall design. Okay. And then, lastly, do think about garnishes. A garnish is like the ribbon or the bow that we attach to the present. After you've, wrapped that gift, it certainly looks good, but it looks even better once you finish it with that garnish, right? That bow or that ribbon. And so that's what we're doing to the plate. And, it can be certainly chopped herbs. It can be a full sprig of herb. It can be something like, diced tomatoes or bell peppers to create some color contrast on the plate. Or it could be something entirely different, like a crispy bread stick, kind of a cracker-like bread stick that also provides some height on the plate simultaneously, as well as textural contrast. Right, so we have multi-functions out of a single ingredient sometimes. Okay, a garnish generally should relate to the ingredients, some ingredients that are in the dish, or relate to the dish thematically in some way. Okay, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that we try to use garnishes that are edible on the plate. Again, this is a North American perspective, and those rules vary quite a bit around the world. Okay, and so hopefully that'll get you started as you play around with plating, right, which is a lot of fun. Thank you. All right, next up from Laura. Good to see you. Well, kinda, right? Welcome. Let's take a look at your first question here. I love vanilla, and recipes often call for vanilla extract, especially for baking. However, it contains alcohol, and my husband is allergic to it. Does alcohol evaporate during the baking process? If so, does that neutralize its allergenic effects? Couple of very interesting questions, as are all of your questions, Laura, but focusing on an alcohol-based extract. There is certainly some evaporation that takes place, but there is often some residual alcohol, whether you're flambeing something or whether it's used in baking. How much that is, and really if there is, depends on probably a number of factors. And I don't have a specific answer, a certain answer that I can give you. So err on the safe side, knowing that there could possibly be some residual alcohol. And then the other part of your question is, are any allergenic effects neutralized if the alcohol is evaporated? And that I don't know. You might want to reach out to a local university that has a food sciences program and pose this question. It's an interesting one. Thank you. And next up, from Laura. All right, so far I've noticed that cumin, cardamom, cinnamon, turmeric, and black pepper are often present in Ruby's recipes more than other spices. Is there a reason for that? For example, their health properties, role in the recipe, etc. My response to that is that cardamom, cinnamon, turmeric, and black pepper are just common, not just in Ruby recipes, but just they are staple spices across many recipes that I encounter. Then otherwise they're good for you, you bet. And then, in terms of the role in the recipe, it's always to provide aromatic, aspect to the food, which equals flavor. Now, here's where practice comes into play. All right, so you can use all of those together, or you can use them separately or pair them in different ways and adjust ratios in order to create some very different outcomes when it comes to the flavor enjoyment. And of course, all of these spices and others that are not mentioned here will act and react differently with other foods, with other ingredients. So it's going to be up to you to practice and learn, right, the personality of each of these spices, okay? Knowing all along that they're certainly good for you, all right? And somewhere in our live event archives, I have a talk about adding spices to your cooking. I'm a big fan of adding spices to everything that you prepare. And, certainly turmeric is probably at or near the top of my list. Turmeric goes into absolutely everything in our household. Give that a try. Thank you. All right, Robert says, I use a rice cooker for steaming. The demo videos show expensive steamer pots by Viking. Do I need to get one of these to complete this segment of the class? No, please use the equipment that you have and that you're comfortable with. There are, many different steamers out there, bamboo steamers and expensive Viking steamers and rice cookers and things like, the Instant Pot or similar electronic pressure cookers also have a steamer setting. So there are many different ways to steam your food. And so please take the path of least resistance. Thank you. And next up, this is from Susan. Let's see, do you have a recommendation on how to expand making your own recipes, such as influences from different cultures? Okay, yes. So number one, become confident in cooking methods and techniques, okay, which is the focus of our Ruby approach to cooking. Then, as you take control of recipes, right? Instead of having recipes control you and the way you cook, as you control recipes, you will start to see, right, where you can make changes and start with easy changes and then dive deeper into creating your own recipes with more significant changes, okay? Now, one place to start in terms of flavors is the Flavor Bible. That's the title of a book. There are others out there similar to the Flavor Bible, but that's one that comes to mind. And the Flavor Bible will list many different combinations of ingredients relative to types of preparations as they are aligned with regional flavor profiles. And this is a great way to study cooking and to practice this type of creativity in the kitchen. Thank you. All right, next up. Okay, look at that. Patrick has posted the link to our archived live event on spices. I hope you'll give it a watch. Thank you. And next up, do you have a seasonal chart for vegetables and how to select quality veggies, what to look for to choose the best ones? So, somewhere in a couple of our courses, we talk at least a little bit about this, and nothing's coming to the top of my head here in terms of specifically where to find that. But we have some of that embedded in a couple of courses. Okay. Now you can always check online if you want something a little bit more immediate, without sifting through the tasks of the course you're in. Certainly there is some information that you can find, within a few seconds if you want it. Thank you. And let's see, next up, I've seasoned my granite mortar and pestle and have been using it for several months now with spices. Do I ever have to wash or rinse it? Vicki, only if you want to, or if you can, reasonably tell that you ought to, in terms of, the buildup of flavors from one item that you don't want in the next item that you're prepping. Okay. I'm trying to think of how often I wash my mortar and pestles around here, and it's probably not that often, quite frankly. Unless it's something wet and pasty, I'll give it a quick rinse out with some water. Okay, but that's going to be up to you and in your judgment. Thank you. All right, next up from Emma. In terms of the course, when a recipe calls for wheat or gluten-containing flours, and I have an allergy or gluten, what should I do? In particular, what blend of gluten-free flours would be the best replacement for pastry flour? So a couple of questions here. Number one, regarding gluten-containing flours in the course, I think it depends on the function of the flour and what it is that you're making. Okay, and maybe even which assignment it is. We've got, one assignment, I think it's the Seitan assignment in the Pro Plant course, that is in there as a pro level course, because seitan is a fairly common item within the plant-based world, and we want students to be familiar with the handling of that product. And so in that case, it may be difficult to find a substitution, but in other instances, it just depends on the role of the flour. Okay. And very often the substitute is readily at hand. All right. So you can certainly reach out to us at support@rouxbe.com with your specific question, and then we can, come up with a specific response to that. And then the second part of your question here, in terms of gluten-free flours, flour blends as a replacement to pastry flour, my quick response here is to take a look at what is available at the grocery store. Okay, so for example, companies like Bob's Red Mill market ready-made gluten-free blends, and they've got multiple such blends, and you might find something that is suitable as a substitute for pastry flour. And you can always send Bob's Red Mill an email. Their turnaround time is very quick, within a day or so. It's been my experience recently, and pose this question, and they can help provide some specific guidance as well as the grain experts. Thank you. All right, and a follow-up from Emma. Also, what about a substitute for another allergy, soy? Again, it depends on the specific scenario. So, reach out to us with details, and that's going to be, I think, the most effective way to address some of these substitution questions. Thank you. And follow-up from Ostrin. When using seasonings and herbs, does the flavor of the food change drastically? I think it depends on the overall combination of the ingredients, and certainly the spice or the herb that's in question. Okay, some of them are just going to be much more pungent than others. But then if you're pairing it with something that's fairly bold in flavor versus something mild in flavor, then the results can be quite different. So it's really a matter of practice. And this is where I'm going to encourage you to exercise your curiosity and just give it a try and see how you like it. And you can adjust ratios and combinations and learn so much about these sort of pairings. Thank you. All right, so Susanna is asking, how might I correct for too much black pepper in a sauce? The quick answer that comes to mind is to increase the overall volume of the sauce in order to thin down that flavor and the heat and all that from the black pepper. All right, thank you. And next up, what are some of the best ingredients to use when searing a tuna? So ingredients to use, I'm guessing this means like ingredients to put on the tuna in some fashion, like spices specifically, I'm guessing, or dried herbs. Or maybe it means the sauce afterwards, I'm not sure. But let me share a couple of thoughts. Very commonly we see black pepper in a more coarse grind that's added along with a touch of salt. But try some other things. There are products made from, for example, yuzu, which is a Japanese citron. This can pair very nicely, as well as other citrus fruits from Japan that are available as a seasoning in both dry and paste form. This provides a beautiful aromatic world to explore if you are unfamiliar with these East Asian citrus fruits that are not yet mainstreamed in places like North America. Okay, so yeah, I'll leave it at that with those suggestions within the citrus category. Thank you. All right, and next up, how can I use mustard seed? I bought way too much. The way that I like to use mustard seed is to bloom it in a little bit of oil so that the oil itself is permeated with the flavor of the toasted mustard seed. And so what's important here is that you heat up the oil to a pretty warm temperature, and then add the mustard seeds and then wait for them to start to pop. And at that point, you can immediately turn off the heat. The residual heat in the pan of the oil is usually sufficient to follow through with the toasting and popping of the mustard seeds. And then you'll want to remove that from the pan immediately once the seeds stop popping, in order to avoid burning the spices. And I will use that in a dressing. I will pour that over, for example, a slaw, just as a very quick and easy dressing. And then you get that nice, toasty, unique flavor to mustard seed that will permeate that salad. All right, so give that a try. Thank you. All right, and next question. I am hosting my family, so parents and children, for the first time in 15 months, all vaccinated. There will be 11 people here for 8 days. I would like to continue my plant-based menu. What meals are good for large groups, easy to make and pleasing to all? Well, Gigi, I would say just think about some of the dishes that you have enjoyed to date. and try to create those on a larger scale. And maybe it's going to be, two casseroles instead of one small casserole worth of the plant-based manicotti, for example. It could be another pasta-based dish that uses a cashew bechamel. Certainly fresh salsas are always easy to make, and I always recommend those. They produce a lot of flavor. But just take a look at some of the practice recipes, within either the Rouxbe course that you're in or the Rouxbe gallery of recipes, and produce those. I think that's the way to do it. Thinking about your audience and what their flavor and texture preferences might be. All right, thank you. And next up from Albert, can I flash freeze fresh herbs? I'm trying to cut down waste, and I find fresh herbs tend to go bad before I get a chance to use them all. Yes, you bet. Freezing herbs does work. Keep in mind that generally speaking, when you thaw herbs, that they will take on a very dark or sometimes blackish color because of the way the cells have been damaged through the freeze-thaw cycle. So you're not going to use it as a garnish, but you might put it into a soup or a stew, maybe a sauce, in order to impart some of the flavor that's still residual to that thawed herb. Another way to handle an excess of herbs is to clean them, to puree them, and then to store them, for example, in an ice cube tray, or at least set them up that way. You can pop them out, then hold them in a Ziploc bag, and then those can be dropped into a soup or a stew or a sauce, for example, as a little finishing touch. Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind as you move forward with your bounty of fresh herbs. Thank you. All right, next up from Cheryl. Throughout the course, will recommendations for wine pairings be discussed? No, not at all. Unfortunately, we don't have a focus on wine as a beverage in terms of wine pairings in our courses. Okay, there are certainly many resources online that can sort of start you off down that avenue by providing some recommendations. And there are many books as well from your local library or from your local bookseller that can help you get started in this area. All right, it's a lot of fun to do, and this also can provide many years of learning entertainment, not to mention the enjoyment that comes along with drinking wine with your food. Enjoy, Cheryl. All right, next up from Kate. I have several food sensitivities: gluten, corn, bananas, mushrooms, just to name a few. How do I go about substitutes? Do I ask the instructor, or do I do research online in advance of a recipe? So this is where you want to reach out to us if it's going to be a graded assignment, so that we can kind of keep you on a path that will best ensure a learning outcome that matches your result that matches the learning outcome that's been prescribed for that particular lesson. But for cooking in general, you might take a look at the interwebs and see what information that you come up with. Understanding that your results, right, will be different from that original recipe or the way that you might have experienced it in its original form in the past. All right, thank you. And next up, good evening. So I joined late. I did not hear today's questions. Please, can you repeat it, please? Well, I am not able to repeat the questions here, but you're welcome to watch this archived live event as soon as we're done today. Okay, Patrick, our producer, will have it posted within a pretty short period of time, and you're welcome to watch the recorded version. Thank you. And follow-up question, when will this FOK course that I am in, April start, end? Okay, so for your particular course, it'll end 142 days from today. Thank you. And next up, another question from Austrin. I was also wondering what would be the best complementing knife for a left-handed student? So this is an interesting question. As I think about knives, I always think that it's best if one can get their hand on a variety of knives, by going to a knife store, because knives are kind of a personal thing, and they need to be comfortable not just in your grip, right, in terms of the way the handle feels, but also the balance of that knife is important. As well as the style of knife relative to the way it's going to be used. Okay. And there are certainly left-handed knives in the world. And, you also have some control on the way that you sharpen any knife. You can adjust the bevel on the left or right side to favor one side or the other. So take into consideration those points, as you consider a knife for a left-handed person. All right, thank you. All right, Teresa says, great plating advice. Thank you so much, Teresa. I hope you are able to apply some of those ideas. I had hoped that would be covered in the class. Those were so helpful. What size plates are best to use for good health and appearance? Let's see. Well, depending on which course you're in, I think in particular at this point, the Pro Cook course, does. Okay. Okay. So let me quickly say that the Pro Cook course dives a little bit deeper into plating, but yes, take those points and use them in the Forks Over Knives course as well. And so in terms of the plate size, a common starting point is about 9 or 10 inches in diameter, okay? And that's going to be for appearance in terms of giving you the real estate, right, for plating food. Now, in terms of health, I'll leave that up to you in terms of just simply adjusting the amount of food that you put on the plate, okay? Thank you very much. And next up, what's the best material that you recommend for a mortar, wood or stone? Any of the above. I've got bronze and stainless steel and granite and marble and wood and ceramic, and they all work very well. Some things are I think, intended for a category of foods and maybe not intended for others. In terms of the hardness of the food item versus the material of the mortar and the pestle. So keep that in mind. For example, I wouldn't be whacking away at really hard items in a pottery, right, or earthenware mortar, but rather work on softer items in a mortar of that sort of material. But they can all work very well. It just depends upon you getting used to that particular item. Now, other things to consider are also the design, right, of the mortar. Some are relatively deeper relative to their width, and others are a little bit more shallow. And I find that wet, pasty items call for a deeper bowl, whereas dry items like spices do very well in most any mortar. So do keep that in mind as you make a selection. Thank you. All right, next up. Hello, Jess. I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask or not. We use your program with our culinary students, but our school specific Rouxbe site isn't working and just giving an error message. Any help would be amazing. Jess, please. Okay, yes, your query has already been forwarded to our engineering team for attention. Okay, so hang tight, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you. All right, next up, Gabriela. Is your recommendation to make all the Rouxbe recipes to be graded, or sometimes can I make my own recipes, for example, Mexican dishes? For the graded assignments, I will ask that you select from our practice recipes that are offered for that particular task. And then beyond that, please apply the cooking methods and techniques to recipes of your choice. Okay, but again, for recipes to be graded, please select from the practice recipes that we offer in that task. Thank you. And next up, hello, Angie. I'm very excited with this course. I'm originally from Venezuela, and since arepa is one of our staple foods, I was wondering how easy it would be to find organic corn. And where'd that question go? Let's see here. Oh, there we go. And I was wondering how easy it would be to find organic corn, and if you happen to know other ingredients to replace it. Organic corn is certainly available, and you'll certainly find it online, and depending on where you live and what sort of specialty stores you have access to, you could find it locally as well. But do start online. And other ingredients, I would imagine they're probably easy to find, really, if you're looking online. Without having any other specific information here, I'll leave my answer at that. But do check online. Okay, that's going to be your best bet. Thank you. And let's see. So Teresa has a follow-up here. So to the person who asked about seasonal veggies, there's a website called healthylifeforme.com that has a list for each month. I just finished the plant-based course here, and there is a segment on how to choose vegetables. Best of health to you. Thank you very much, Teresa, for following up. I appreciate your additional information. All right. And just like that, we are at the end of today's program. As always, I want to thank all of you for joining us for today's live event, and specifically for my office hours. It's always nice to see you. I recognize some familiar faces in the audience, and it's good to see many new faces as well. I'd like to mention one last thing before we part ways today, and that is, as a follow-up to the office hours, if you have questions, there are a couple of ways to pose those questions. One, if you have a question that is specific to information in a given task, please look at the bottom right-hand corner or the right-hand area of your screen, and you'll find access to the Q&A for that particular task. Please keep your question related to the content on that page. And then the second way is to reach out to support@rouxbe.com, and a member of our team will answer your question. And those questions could be other questions that are not task specific. So they could be technical, they could be equipment related, or something else. Okay? And until we meet again, I wish you the joy of cooking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.